Part 28. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 273. Chapter 273, Pity. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Mu Yangling stayed for another day. After walking around the city, she brought back 4 stewards and let them have their pick for 4 taels of silver per sheep. The 4 stewards were all stewards of famous wealthy families in the city, and were very dissatisfied with Mu Yangling's increase in price. "Young lady, I heard that you just sold one to someone for 3 taels yesterday. Why did the price increase by 1 tael in just a day?" "That's right, even if our boss is rich, he won't let others take advantage of him like this." Mu Yangling hurriedly explained, "Steward uncles, you've misunderstood. I chose the sheep I herded into the city yesterday. They wanted 40 sheep, so I herded 40 there. Among those sheep, the smallest one is only worth 3 taels and 60 copper coins. When going by weight, I sold it to them in one go. As for the largest one," Mu Yangling smiled in embarrassment and said, "although I haven't weighed it, I know a little about the sheep since I've raised them for so long. The largest one is worth about 3 taels and 500 copper coins by weight. But look at the sheep the few of you are choosing here." Mu Yangling pointed at the sheep and said, "Other than the 6 that the Bai family brought away this morning, there are still 254 left. If I let you choose one for 3 taels of silver, won't the few of you choose the best ones? That last one can probably be sold for 5 taels of silver." Boolsh *T. Our family head is an honest person. Why would he take advantage of you? "That's right, it's not like they're so poor that they can't eat." The 4 stewards looked at the flock of sheep and felt that a few of them were especially strong and energetic. They waved their hands and said, all right, 4 taels it is. How should we get them out?" "Don't worry about it, just point it out to me and I'll capture it for you." The 4 stewards also found it dirty, so they stood outside the fence and wandered around the sheep. Someone pointed at a fatter one and said, "I want this one." Mu Yangling stepped into the fence and stared intently at the sheep, then quickly grabbed one of its legs and carried it out. The 4 stewards clicked their tongues and ordered sheep one after another for Mu Yangling to catch. In the end, Mu Yangling caught a total of 15 sheep. Mu Yangling tied up the sheep selected by the 4 stewards separately before washing her hands and settling the bill with them. Knowing that the sheep they chose was worth more than 4 taels, they happily paid Mu Yangling the money. Those 15 sheep cost a total of 60 taels of silver. After the silver and goods were exchanged, each steward herded their sheep back. Ziyuheng curled her lips and said, "They're really stingy, unlike the Bai family, who immediately said that they were willing to buy one for 5 taels of silver. After that, they even gave 2 taels of silver as a reward." Smiling, Bowen said, "The Bai family's steward is also smarter than them to ask sister to help them choose the sheep. Those 6 sheep were all chosen by sister and were much more muscular than the ones chosen by the stewards." Bowen is right. We have a win-win situation with the Bai family. All right, throw some grass into the flock. Don't forget to refill the water. Serve them well. Let's go eat our fill and sleep in a while. We have to set off before dawn tomorrow, otherwise, we won't have time to find a place to stay when we reach Xinyuan Prefecture. Mu Yangling sat cross-legged on the brick bed and counted the money she had earned over the past 2 days. Excluding the copper coins, she had collected a total of 216 taels of silver. It looked like a lot, but it did not actually feel like much when placed in the pouch, weighing merely slightly over 13 caddies. Mu Yangling expressed that as long as it was silver, the heavier the better. After counting the money, she placed the bag on the brick bed and leaned against the wall to look outside. As this window faced the flock of sheep, she would be able to see the sheep once she opened her eyes. Bowen and Ziyuheng had gone to sleep, and she didn't know where the landlord's family were. The people wandering behind the trees outside didn't dare to go forward. After taking a look, Mu Yangling yawned. Having lost interest, she fell asleep on the brick bed with the blanket over her. Mu Yangling thought that the other party would make a move in the afternoon, when they were sleeping more soundly, but she still overestimated them. When she woke up, Those people were still hesitating behind the tree and did not dare to go forward. Perhaps because it was daytime, they still did not have the guts. Mu Yangling sat on the brick bed and thought for a while. She felt that this was most likely not a habitual thief, so she put on her clothes and walked out in the direction where they were hiding. Unexpectedly, after only about 20 steps, those people realized that something was wrong and turned around to run. Mu Yangling could only stop in her tracks and watch helplessly as they disappeared. She didn't want to arrest them. She just wanted to talk to them about life, but the other party seemed to be very afraid of her. After some thought, she turned around and went back. Having woken up by now, Ziyuheng and Bowen looked at Mu Yangling in confusion. "Sister, where did you go just now?" "I just walked outside for a while. Since you're up, get out of bed, we'll make dinner. Also, we have to prepare the rations for tomorrow. I don't think we'll have time to stop and rest at noon tomorrow." Upon hearing this, Ziyuheng instantly sobered up and immediately got off the brick bed. Considering her cousin's culinary skills, the task of cooking ultimately fell upon her. Mu Yangling also knew that she wasn't very good at this. She felt that her home-cooked food was very decent, but it certainly couldn't compare to Xu Wanyang and Grey Tant's superb culinary skills. Even Ziyuheng's culinary skills had improved dramatically this year. Xu Wanyang's opinion was that she was already 3 streets ahead of Mu Yangling. Hence, Mu Yangling assisted Ziyuheng in the kitchen. By the time they had prepared the rations for tomorrow, it was already dark. Mu Yangling and the others began to eat. They didn't eat badly, but it couldn't compare to what they usually ate at home. However, this was enough for the children of the landlord's family to drool. Mu Yangling had just eaten a mouthful of meat when she saw the 2 children hiding outside the door and looking in eagerly at the meat on her chopsticks, swallowing their saliva from time to time. Mu Yangling waved at them and said, "Go home and bring over a bowl of rice." The older sister understood and pulled her younger brother to run next door. Soon, the 2 little ones brought 2 bowls of rice over. Seeing that they were standing there uneasily, and even when Mu Yangling asked them to eat, they merely timidly pick up a chopstick of food. After thinking for a while, she took an empty bowl and filled it up with some food. Then, she placed them aside and said, "Eat." The 2 children carefully glanced at Mu Yangling and the rest before wolfing down the food. Bowen's eyes widened, but Ziyuheng stared at them in a daze. She remembered that when she first arrived at the Mu residence, she, too, had fought for food like this. As she was really too hungry and greedy, she couldn't focus on anything other than the food. Mu Yangling knocked on the bowl and said, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and eat." The 2 of them quickly lowered their heads and ate. Mu Yangling and the others had made quite a lot of food, but the rice was only enough for themselves. However, the 2 children clearly did not need more rice. They gobbled up all the dishes on the table and their stomachs were full. Mu Yangling was afraid that their stomachs would burst, so she kept reminding them not to eat too much. The 2 children only lowered their heads and ate fiercely. The elder of the 2 children was only 5 years old. Although her face was a little sallow, their family situation shouldn't be so bad that their kids had to starve, right? Ziyuheng leaned close to Mu Yangling's ear and said, "Farmers can't bear to eat much if they have some money, they want to save it first in case they need it urgently in the future. I think their parents must be even more ill-fed than them. Everyone lives like this." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 274. Chapter 274, Thief. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Around 4 in the morning, Mu Yangling woke Bowen and Ziyuheng up. The cold wind outside was chilly enough to freeze people to death, but she still decided to set off now. They didn't pass through the county, but bypassed it and walked east. The prefectural capital of Xinyuan Prefecture was east of Three Springs County. Although it would take a lot of time to enter the county and leave the east gate, the city gate had yet to open, and she was herding a flock of sheep. The soldiers guarding the gate might not be willing to let her in, and who knew how much money they would try to extort from her before they let her enter. Mu Yangling had already asked the landlord about it. There was a gentle slope on the main road. As long as they crossed the gentle slope, they would be able to see a small path. They could walk directly from there and finally reach the main road of Xinyuan Prefecture. Mu Yangling put on a rabbit fur scarf, a dog fur hat, and a wolf fur coat on them. In the end, only their eyes and noses were revealed. Exhaling, Mu Yangling said, "All right, let's go." "Cousin, why aren't you dressed like us?" "I'm in good health, besides, I'm also wearing a hat and gloves. I'm fine." The key was that she still had to herd sheep. Mu Yangling touched Blackie and kissed its neck affectionately. "Thanks for the hard work in advance, buddy. There's a section of road that's more difficult to walk later." "All right, don't take the carriage anymore. Let's walk for a while first, otherwise, you'll die from the cold." Mu Yangling chased the sheep out and walked in front. Ziyuheng hurriedly walked in front and held the lantern. Blackie didn't have to be led and followed behind smartly. Bowen stumbled a little, but at least he caught up. When they were about to walk out of the village entrance, Mu Yangling herded the sheep forward and walked down the main road towards a tree. Then, she stretched out her leg and kicked the two trembling people. Seeing that they did not wake up, she exerted more strength and kicked them to the ground. Trembling as they opened their eyes, the two of them were startled to see Mu Yangling. Mu Yangling removed the wine flasks on her waist, unscrewed the lids and poured a mouthful into each of their mouths. She said unhappily, "Consider yourselves lucky this wine happened to be warm because it was placed beside the stove last night." When the wine entered their bodies, the two of them felt hot from the inside out. They shivered and looked at Mu Yangling in a daze. Mu Yangling patted their faces and felt that they should be awake now, so she said, "All right, hurry up and go home. Why would you want to be a thief?" With that, Mu Yangling took out a tael of silver from her pouch and stuffed it into their hands. She waved her hand and said, "Leave quickly, or I'll beat you up." After saying that, she turned around and caught up with the flock of sheep in front. Ziyuheng jogged to Mu Yangling's side and asked, "Cousin, who are they? Aren't they courting death by sleeping outside on such a cold day?" "Exactly, they want to be a thief yet lack the guts. They've been watching for an entire day and night. As a result, I've been on guard for half a night for nothing." Because she knew that there were thieves outside, she didn't dare to fall asleep and merely dozed off in short bouts. After causing her trouble for a day and a night, not only did they not have the guts to steal, but they even almost froze to death outside. Mu Yangling was speechless. When Ziyuheng heard that they were thieves, she immediately widened her eyes. Then, "Cousin, why did you still give them silver?" "That's right, sister, it's already good enough that we don't send them to the officials, right?" Mu Yangling patted their heads and said, "They just had the intention to steal, but they haven't done it yet. It's obvious that they're newbies and aren't bold enough. Such a person won't do it again after someone gives them a helping hand. Therefore, we have to forgive people wherever possible." The group climbed the gentle slope and then climbed down the gentle slope. Then, there was a relatively gentle path. Although the ground was still a little uneven, it was much easier to walk than the gentle slope before. Starting to sweat, just as Ziyuheng and Bowen were about to loosen their scan/es, Mu Yangling quickly slapped their hands and said, "Don't remove it. You've just started sweating and you're removing your scarf. If the cold wind enters your body, can you withstand it? Walk forward slowly and extend your breathing. You'll be fine in a while." The two of them could only stop. By the time they walked onto the main road, the sky was already bright and the cold air had been dispelled by the sun. The three of them turned around and saw that Three Springs County was already way behind them. Mu Yangling stopped at a place and waved at them. "All right, go find some dry firewood. Let's start a fire and have breakfast." The flock of sheep stood at the side to rest. It was also very difficult for them to travel in such cold weather. "Cousin, I feel colder today than yesterday and the day before." Mu Yangling nodded. I reckon we're unlucky to have encountered a cold current. Mu Yangling turned around and glared at a spot. How long do you plan to follow us? Startled, Ziyuheng and Bowen turned around and saw two half-dead youths stumbling out from behind a tree at the entrance of the path. The two of them were supporting each other and wearing patched cotton clothes, looking at Mu Yangling in fear. Mu Yangling's gaze slid past their hands and knees. Seeing that there was some mud on them, and even a vague trace of blood, she knew that they had fallen on the road. It turned out that she hadn't heard wrongly. When she was going down the slope, she heard something roll down. As it was dark, she couldn't see anything. She'd thought that the two people who had secretly followed her had accidentally dropped something, but it turned out that they had actually fallen themselves. How stupid! Mu Yangling turned around and ignited the firewood with hay, then waved at them. Come over. Are you planning to be a wife? Watching stone copyright over there, the two young men blushed and supported each other as they walked over. They glanced at Mu Yangling timidly, and the younger young man said, we're not married. If Mu Yangling had water in her mouth, she would definitely spit it out. What kind of godly reply was this? Ziyuheng and Bowen couldn't help but be amused. They weren't so wary of them now. Seeing that they were talking, Ziyuheng and Bowen went over to bring over the dry rations they had prepared. Although it was called dry rations, it was 10 steamed buns, half a pot of braised pork, and 20 pancakes. Bowen placed the pot filled with braised pork on the fire to heat it up. Soon, there was a sizzling sound of oil, and fragrance kept wafting out. Ziyuheng, on the other hand, picked up a pair of chopsticks and roasted the steamed bun by the fire. After heating it up, she made an incision and picked up the braised pork to fill the steamed bun. The two young men looked at the things in their hands without blinking, swallowing their saliva the entire time. Mu Yangling stretched out a pot of water in front of them and said, "Drink a few mouthfuls of water before eating." The two of them took it in a daze and gulped down half a pot of water. Only then did they realize that they weren't that hungry anymore. The two of them looked at Mu Yangling resentfully, took the meat buns that Ziyuheng had stuffed into their hands, and wolfed them down. After they ate and drank their fill, Mu Yangling propped her chin on her hand and looked at them. Seeing that his brother was still eating, the older brother pushed him. The younger brother immediately wiped his mouth and sat up straight to look at Mu Yangling. "All right, can you tell me what's going on now? What are your names, where are you from, and why are you following me?" The younger brother looked at the older brother. The older brother was at a loss for a moment before managing to speak. Miss Mu, our surname is Zhang. My name is Zhang Lu. Copyright. This is my cousin, Zhang Lu. Copyright. Your names are quite easy to remember. Zhang Lu scratched his head and said, "There's no one who can read in our family, so the kids are all named according to their order of birth. I'm the sixth in the family, hee hee." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 275. Chapter 275. Moving People. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Your family has quite a lot of kids. Bowen curiously sized them up as he asked, "Aren't you cold dressed like this outside?" Zhang Wu smiled bitterly. "These are all the clothes we have. How could they not be cold?" If Mu Yangling hadn't woken them up, they might have already become corpses. Zhang Wu and Zhang Lu were from the village where they stayed earlier. Their parents had died when they were very young. First, Zhang Wu's parents passed away when he was 6 years old, after which he was raised by his uncle, Zhang Liu's father. However, in just 3 years, Zhang Liu's father died when he went out to do hard labor. Zhang Liu's mother raised them for 2 years before committing suicide due to hardship when Zhang Lu was 9 years old. Therefore, the two brothers had always relied on each other. The villagers had helped them before, and they had also gone to the county to beg. They would pick up scraps during the autumn harvest and beg for a bowl of rice when they worked for others in the fields in spring. The two of them had managed to survive until today by living this way. However, life was especially difficult this year. First, there was the drought in early summer. The grains harvested in the fields was not even enough to pay taxes, so the villagers naturally did not have any excess rations to support them. The alms they received in the city also became less and less. On the day Mu Yangling entered the village, they had been starving and digging up the undead grass stems to eat. Their faces were sallow. The two of them were thin and weak, but they looked old. It was all because of years of hard labor. Actually, Zhongwu was only 18 years old this year, and Zhonglu was only 16 years old. In Mu Yangling's previous life, they would merely be two high school students. Yet, they had already experienced too much. They only wanted to steal Mu Yangling's sheep because they truly were at their wits' end this time. However, after watching for a day and a night, they still lacked the guts to make a move. They could not get over the hurdle in their hearts. Zhongwu had said that the two of them had been helped by many people along the way as they grew up. Although they didn't know much, they knew right from wrong. Back then, when he was squatting behind the tree and his consciousness became more and more blurry, he'd felt that perhaps dying wasn't so bad. At the very least, he wouldn't do anything to embarrass his parents, uncle, and aunt. When Zhongwu said this, Zhonglu lowered his head in shame. It was because he couldn't stand the hunger that his cousin wanted to steal Mu Yangling's sheep. Then why are you following us now? Mu Yangling crossed her arms and looked down at them. I remember giving you 5 taels of silver if you use it sparingly. You should be fine when spring arrives soon. Face reddened with shame, Zhongwu took out the piece of silver that was still warm from his body and stuffed it into Mu Yangling's hand. He said uneasily, I am sorry. With that, he pulled his younger brother to bow to Mu Yangling and turned to run. Stop right there, Mu Yangling called out to them. She frowned as she looked at their feet, which were only clad in straw sandals. She felt cold for them. Mu Yangling could not sit back and do nothing. If the two of them ran away like this, they would freeze to death in less than 3 days even if they did not starve to death. She handed the silver back and said with a relaxed expression, take it, go to the city and find something to do. You're all grown up, it shouldn't be a problem for you to support yourselves. Zhongwu hesitated for a moment before glancing at his brother. In the end, he still took the silver. He bowed gratefully to Mu Yangling and said with reddened eyes, till use this money to buy tools for forest conversion. I'll definitely convert 2 acres of land before spring. At that time, we'll have the money to buy seeds and won't starve to death in winter. Miss Mu, don't worry, we're strong and will return the money to you one day. But where can I find you when I have the money? If you use money to buy tools and seeds, what will you eat and where? Mu Yangling said angrily, this is for you to live since you live so close to the county. Can't you find work in the city? With your limbs intact, there's plenty of work that you can do. If they planned to farm land converted from forest land, Mu Yangling felt that before they could start farming, they would have already started to starve to death. How can it be that simple? Zhonglu shouted. Competition is tough for people who wish to become apprentices. In order to snatch a spot as an apprentice or assistant shopkeeper, people make use of connections and bribes. We don't have anything, and everyone in Three Springs County knows that we're beggars. No one will use us. Zhang Liu's eyes were filled with tears as he said, 2 years ago, my older brother helped out at the grain store, helping them carry grains and sweep the floor. In short, he fought to do all kinds of dirty and tiring work. He just wanted to be an apprentice. He didn't ask to be paid. He just asked for 3 meals a day, so that he could eventually have a way out. But after 4 months of carrying grains and doing all sorts of dirty and tiring work, all he got was a black bun every day and nothing else. My brother merely probed if he could become an apprentice, and they chased him out and even beat him up. Nobody would even hire him to do manual labor. We only thought of stealing because we really have no way out. In my opinion, it's better to farm. All we need to do is serve the land. It won't scold us, hit us, or despise us. Brother, don't you think so? Zhang Wu nodded repeatedly and looked at Mu Yangling eagerly. He tightened his grip on the silver in his hand, afraid that Mu Yangling would take it back. Mu Yangling held her forehead with a headache. After looking up at the time, she waved her hand. "All right, let's talk about this later. Coincidentally, I need someone's help here. The two of you can follow me for now." Zhang Wu's eyes lit up. He pulled Zhang Lu to kneel on the ground and kowtowed to Mu Yangling and the others 3 times. "Young Mrs. and young Master, don't worry, we'll definitely work hard." Before Mu Yangling could stop them, she grabbed the back of their collars and picked them up. "All right, stop kneeling also, don't call our young Miss and young Master, just call me Miss Mu. Our family doesn't raise servants." Zhang Wu and Zhang Lu looked at Mu Yangling in a daze. "Isn't Miss Mu going to take us in?" Mu Yangling shook her head repeatedly. "You're all children of good families. It's not as if you sold yourselves away previously. What right do I have to buy your indenture? All right, help me herd the sheep on the way." Zhang Wu and Zhang Lu opened their mouths. Zhang Wu really wanted to tell Mu Yangling that they actually wanted to sell themselves away, but rich families wouldn't take them in. Everyone in Three Springs County knew that the two of them were beggars, so they associated things like stealing and fighting with them. That was even though they had never done anything bad since they were young. Well, except for wanting to steal Miss Mu's sheep. However, if they did not sell themselves to the rich families to be servants, they could only sell themselves to the mines. That kind of lifestyle was worse off than being a beggar or dying. However, seeing that Miss Mu had already herded the flock of sheep to the main road, the two of them wisely did not explain and followed behind to help herd the sheep. Bowen and Ziyuheng climbed into the carriage and sat down, feeling a little drowsy. "Have you guys been to Xinyuan Prefecture before?" Mu Yangling asked as she walked behind. Zhang Wu and Zhang Lu shook their heads repeatedly. "We've never left Three Springs County." Mu Yangling didn't quite understand this. Xinyuan Prefecture isn't far from Three Springs County. It's only a day's walk if you pack up and go to Xinyuan Prefecture from here. Who will know who you are there? You'll slowly find a way out. Zhang Wu and Zhang Lu fell silent. Like most people, they feel fear and aversion to unfamiliar places. Most people in Three Springs County had never been to Xinyuan Prefecture, so they naturally did not have such thoughts. Mu Yangling could only remain silent. It was said that humans had great ability to adapt. Why couldn't these two adapt to circumstances? The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 276. Chapter 276, Inquiring. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Xinyuan Prefecture was the capital of the entire Lizhu Circuit. It controlled 17 prefectures, such as Xinzhou Prefecture. Therefore, although it was located in the bitterly cold north, this large city was also extremely prosperous. The city wall was tall, and the city gate was about 50 meters long. There was a 30-meter gap in the middle for carriages and people to enter and exit. On both sides, there were other checkpoints where goods and strangers had to enter through. Seeing that the items of some small vendors had been detained, Mu Yangling knew that she would be extorted if she herded this batch of sheep in. Stunned by the gates of Xinyuan Prefecture, the 4 people by her side could not recover for a moment. After a long while, Zhang Wu smacked his lips and sighed. "So this is Xinyuan Prefecture. All right, we can't enter the city today. Let's find a place to stay nearby and rest for the night. We'll enter the city tomorrow." Zhang Wu and Zhang Lu hurriedly helped to herd the sheep in another direction and found a small village nearby. Because the city gate was still open, there were not many people who needed to stay outside. Therefore, the new landlord did not charge them a lot of money. At least, it was much cheaper than staying in the city. After all, they still had a large flock of sheep, and ordinary inns would not accept this. Zhang Wu had just moved the things on the carriage into the house when he saw that Ziyuheng wanted to measure the rice and cook. He quickly went forward to help, but Ziyuheng stopped him and asked, "Do you know how to cook?" Zhang Wu scratched his head and chuckled. "My cooking is edible." Then let me do it, help me buy some vegetables, we have meat here. As she spoke, she took out 10 copper coins and handed it to him. Mu Yangling was asking the landlord about the situation in Xinyuan prefecture and the taxes levied on goods in order to bring them into the city. The landlord took a look at their sheep. Mu Yangling cleverly stuffed 10 copper coins into his hand. Smiling, the landlord said, "Miss, the governor of Xinyuan prefecture is kind-hearted for farm products like cows, sheep, and vegetables. We just need to give them a small token when we enter the city. However, considering you have a lot of sheep, I'm afraid." Mu Yangling hurriedly said, "Uncle, these sheep don't all belong to my family, but to the various families in the village. Didn't the Hus get chased away by General Qi? No one will keep these sheep now. There's a drought this year, and crop harvest is poor. My village had no choice but to let me herd the flock of sheep here to try my luck." "Well, you should be able to pay less tax if you secretly give some money to the soldiers guarding the gate." "In that case, she'd better pay the taxes." It was precisely the additional money that she needed to give the soldiers that she was afraid of paying. If she wanted to herd her entire flock of sheep into the city, it would at most cost 4 to 5 taels of silver. However, if the guards wanted to take away 2 sheep, should she resist or pretend not to see them? Bribing soldiers was more expensive than paying taxes. Mu Yangling was troubled. How are we going to herd such a large flock of sheep in? Bowen scooped a bowl of rice for his sister and said, "Why must we herd all of them in, sister? We can invite the buyers out of the city like we did with landlord Bai and the others. Let them choose for ourselves. Those soldiers guarding the door only dare to ask for bribes because we're foreigners. If we were locals, we wouldn't encounter such trouble. If we don't manage to sell everything, we can then herd the sheep into the city and try again." Overjoyed, Mu Yangling ruffled Bowen's hair and said, "Clever kid, I didn't think of this. Then let's eat, shower, and have a good sleep first. We'll enter the city tomorrow." Mu Yangling left Zhongwu to look after the flock of sheep and brought Zhonglu, Ziyuheng, and Bowen into the city. Following the crowd into the city and passing through the city gate, the streets inside were suddenly revealed in front of everyone. The streets were twice as wide as Xinzhou prefecture. The sun had just risen, but already, there were many people on the streets. Mu Yangling stood there for a while before saying, "Let's go to the tea house to eat breakfast and ask around." The group found a tea house that looked pretty good and sat down. The tea house had 2 floors, and there was even a shed outside. There were 4 to 5 tables inside, and more than half of the first floor was occupied. However, there were few people on the second floor. Clearly, these people were here to eat breakfast and chat. This was similar to Xinzhou prefecture. Mu Yangling found a table and sat down. A smiley waiter came forward to wipe the table. When he looked up and saw them, he was stunned. He had never seen them before. Although this was a tea house, those who came to eat breakfast were all familiar faces. Few strangers appeared. It was not like they were drinking tea in the afternoon. "Dear guests, what would you like to eat?" The waiter's gaze hesitantly swept away from Zhonglu and landed on Mu Yangling. Mu Yangling glanced at the other tables and said, "Give me 10 big meat buns, 4 bowls of mutton soup, and a plate of beef." Mu Yangling asked after a pause, "Do you have beef?" "Geez, miss, you're so lucky. Yesterday, our shopkeeper just managed to get his hands on dozens of catties of beef. He was about to add another dish to the lunch menu." "All right, that's all for now. Go ahead." When everyone heard what Mu Yangling ordered, they turned to look at them curiously. However, they only took a few glances before turning their heads away. In this era, the meat buns were twice as big as the ones Mu Yangling had bought in her previous life. Although the skin was a little thick, they were equally delicious. Mu Yangling ate 4 of them herself. Bowen and Ziyuheng each ate 1.5. Zhonglu also ate 3. After sweeping the beef on the table clean, the 4 of them drank the hot mutton soup in satisfaction. Seeing that the waiter was no longer so busy, Mu Yangling waved him over and asked, "Brother waiter, where is the mutton seller in the city?" "Miss, you want to buy mutton, then you have to go to the East Market. There are the most mutton there, but you might not be able to buy it after noon. Is mutton in such short supply? Geez, other than pork which is constantly available, mutton and beef have to be bought as early as possible. How can mutton be compared to beef? Cows can't be slaughtered at will, but considering Arsenian prefecture isn't far from the border, how can there be no mutton? Oh, you have no idea. Seeing that she was younger than him, the waiter, who was usually lectured by others and rarely had a chance to lecture someone, said excitedly, although Arsenian prefecture is close to the border, don't you see that the market here closed 4 to 5 years ago? Where can we buy sheep? We do have people raising sheep, but most people focus on farming. Not even 1 out of 10 families raise sheep. Even then, they raise goats and not sheep. However, the taste of goats is simply not comparable to grassland sheep. Seeing Mu Yangling nod as she listened, the waiter became even more excited. He said, "It's an old habit left behind by our ancestors in the winter. We'll eat mutton, drink mutton soup, warm our bodies, and build our foundation. Those with money might even buy a few caddies of donkey meat to try. Everyone wants to buy it, so they'll naturally fight over it. Usually, the mutton will be sold out after noon, so if you want to buy it, you should hurry after finishing your breakfast." How much is mutton for a caddy? That depends on what kind of mutton. Goats are 50 copper coins a caddy. As for authentic grassland sheep that doesn't taste gamey, it costs 56 copper coins a caddy. Alright, considering the huge difference in price, this trip was totally worth it. Seeing that she was deep in thought, the waiter said, "Grassland sheep are easier to sell than goats, but there are also people who like the gamey smell of goats and like the kick of it." Mu Yangling took out 2 copper coins for him and asked with a smile, "Then if I wish to eat mutton, where should I go?" 2 copper coins was not much, but it was a surprise to the waiter, who rarely received tips. Hence, he became even more excited and said, "There are plenty of options, guest. Wait for me to slowly tell you about it." "What about? I want to hear it too." A sinister voice sounded from behind. The waiter was so frightened that he jumped forward. When he looked up, the shopkeeper was standing behind him and glaring at him. "The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 277. Chapter 277, Change of Plan. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Mu Yangling pulled the waiter up and smiled at the shopkeeper. "Shopkeeper, please forgive me. This is my first time here, so there are many things I don't understand, so I asked brother waiter some questions to find out more." When the shopkeeper faced Mu Yangling, his disposition turned sunny. With a beam, he said, "Miss, you're too polite. I'm just worried that this kid will spout nonsense and delay your matters. It's simple. If you want to eat mutton, any eatery in the city has it. There are a few mutton restaurants along the way." Mu Yangling finished the mutton soup in her bowl and wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. Then, she stood up and cupped her fists. "Thank you for your guidance, shopkeeper. I'll settle the bill now and take my leave." Mu Yangling took out some money to pay for the meal and pulled Bowen and the rest out. Ziyuheng hurriedly finished all the mutton soup before catching up. "Cousin, why are we leaving in such a hurry? We met a smart person." Mu Yangling looked ahead and sighed. "I originally wanted to sell the sheep to a few families like in Three Springs County, but that shopkeeper could guess that I was here to sell mutton based on what little he heard. Others aren't stupid. Since we have no one to rely on in Sinyuan Prefecture, we have to be careful, otherwise, we won't even know if we're sold. So what do we do now? Let's try the mutton restaurant. If it really doesn't work, we'll go to the market and ask for the price." However, progress was not very smooth because they did not even get to see the owner of the mutton restaurant. However, the shopkeeper said that they already had a collaborative butcher and would not want the mutton Mu Yangling brought. Even if Mu Yangling said that theirs was top-notch grassland sheep, the shopkeeper was unmoved. Mu Yangling encountered the same situation 3 times in a row. Sinyuan Prefecture was different from a county like Three Springs County. These shop owners clearly trusted their long-term partners more than Mu Yangling, who appeared out of nowhere. Mu Yangling thought about it and felt that since she couldn't work with them, she could just find the butcher they collaborated with and sell the sheep to that butcher. Although she would receive less money, it would save her the trouble of running around. Mu Yangling looked at Zhang Lu and said, "It's up to you now." Zhang Liu's eyes were filled with confusion. Mu Yangling gave him half a tael of silver and said, "Go and find out who supplied the mutton to these shops." Zhang Lu was street smart and knew best who to ask about these things. After receiving the money, he went to buy some food and deliberately ate not far from some stalls. From time to time, he would say a few words to the stall owner. In no time, Mu Yangling could see that Zhang Lu was already squatting down with the stall owner as he ate, even joking and laughing loudly. Ziyuheng and Bowen widened their eyes, dumbfounded. Bowen stuttered and asked, Brother Liuzi is so capable, how can he become buddies with that guy so easily? Humans are biased. Everyone in Three Springs County knows that the two brothers are beggars, and the two of them aren't very bold. I'm afraid even beggars look down on them. Even if they have the ability, they won't be able to use it. But this is Xinyuan Prefecture, and he's wearing newly bought shoes and a wolf fur coat. Not only can he afford to eat sugar stir-fried chestnuts, he can even treat a stranger to it without any care. That vendor doesn't know his background, so he naturally has some respect. Bowen seemed to be deep in thought. That's why Sir said that you can't judge a book by its cover and shouldn't despise someone just because they were down on luck at the moment. Who knows if this person is actually capable and promising? Mu Yangling looked at Zhang Lu, who had already left for another street. Then, she retracted her gaze and looked at her brother seriously. Even if the other party is not very capable and promising, we can't look down on him. Respecting people is basic morality. Those who respect others will always receive respect from everyone. Bowen, Ziyuheng, remember this. Ziyuheng was originally listening in a daze. When she heard her name, she immediately replied in unison with Bowen, "We'll remember." Mu Yangling nodded and glanced in Zhang Liu's direction. "I'm afraid he'll take some time. Let's go shopping in the bookstore first." Bowen, Ziyuheng, I brought you guys here this time to let you see the world. In this world, other than the South, there were no female studies in the North, so she felt that it was a pity. Ziyuheng, I also want to buy a few more books for you and Ziyulan. Now that you've finished reading the 3-character classic and the 1000-character classic, you can recognize the basic words. Therefore, you have to start reading some history books. Yes, it's best to read some general books. They record what famous scholars see and hear on their travels. Sister, don't forget about poems. My teacher said that it's best for girls to read some poems. The rest are secondary. Bowen was very concerned about this matter because he had 3 sisters studying at home. Mu Yangling paused for a moment before nodding. You can read this too. Yes, poems and songs can temper your emotions. Ziyuheng lowered her head like a defeated rooster. She didn't like to study. She felt that what she had learned so far was enough for her already, but her cousin always said that studying more could broaden her horizons. Though, she didn't know exactly what was broadened. On the other hand, her younger sister read with an obsession. It was clearly just the 3-character classic. However, Ziyuheng didn't dare to say it in front of her cousin. However, Mu Yangling was very excited. This was something she had planned long ago. Whenever she had the time, she would come to Xinyuan Prefecture to buy books. This was because the collection of books here was much more complete than in Xinzhou Prefecture. Of course, they were also cheaper. Mu Yangling followed the direction that Zhang Lu had just walked in and realized that he was squatting in front of a restaurant. She was slightly stunned before she smiled happily. This kid was smart enough to figure out her thoughts. Mu Yangling patted Bowen and said, "Go tell Zhang Lu that we're going to the bookstore first and will probably take a long time. Tell him to wait for us here after he's done." As she spoke, she took out a tael of silver from her purse and handed it to him. "Give this to him. Since this kid is street smart, that half tael of silver might not be enough." Bowen took the money and ran over to pass it to Zhang Lu, conveying Mu Yangling's words. Zhang Lu was excited. If he performed well, Would the lady keep him and his older brother? Filled with fighting spirit, Zhonglu looked at Bowen with bright eyes and promised, "Young master, don't worry, I'll definitely do my best." Bowen was confused. He didn't know why Zhonglu suddenly felt as excited as if he had eaten an immortal pill. He nodded and stood on his tiptoes to pat his shoulder, imitating his older sister. "Yes, work hard, and my sister will treat you fairly." With that, he ran away. The vendor standing with Zhonglu came up and asked, "Brother, how many years have you worked for that young master?" Zhonglu nodded. He'd wanted to say that he was a slave, but he remembered that Mu Yangling had said that there were no slaves in the Mu family, so he said, "I'm a short-term worker in their family. Young master and young miss are going to buy books, so they asked me to shop around to buy some things for them." This explained why the other party had given him a tael of silver. The vendor's eyes immediately lit up as he looked at him. "Way to go, brother, from the way young miss and young master trust you so much, you must be doing really well in the future. When you save money, you can go home and get a wife. You haven't gotten a wife yet, right?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 278. Xinyuan Mansion is the capital of the entire Lizhu Road, governing the 17 states below, such as Xingzhou Mansion, so although it is located in the bitterly cold north, this big city is also prosperous. The city wall is high, the gate of the city is about 50 meters long, and 30 meters are left in the middle for the entry and exit of chariots and horses. There are also checkpoints on both sides, and goods and strangers must enter through the checkpoints. After the things were seized, Mu Yangling knew that she would bleed heavily when she drove this batch of sheep in. The four next to them have been suppressed by the gate of Xinyuan Mansion, and they couldn't recover for a while. After a long time, Zhongwu sighed, "This is Xinyuan Mansion. Okay, we can't go into the city today, first go to find a place to live nearby, rest for one night, and then go into the city tomorrow." Zhongwu and Zhonglu hurriedly helped turn the sheep in one direction, and found a small village nearby. Because the gate of the city is still open, there are not many people who need to stay outside, so the new landlord does not charge them a lot of money, at least it is much cheaper than living in the city. You must know that they still have a large flock of sheep, ordinary inns not going to accept this. Zhongwu Ki moved the things on the car into the house, and seeing Ziyuheng wanting to measure rice for cooking, she hurried forward to help. Ziyuheng stopped him and asked, "Can you cook?" Zhongwu scratched his head and said with a smile, "It can be eaten." "Then I'll do it. You can buy some vegetables and come back. We have the meat ourselves," he said, and took out 10 coins for him. Mu Yangling is inquiring about the situation of Xinyuan Mansion with the landlord, as well as the taxes that need to be paid for goods entering the city. The landlord glanced at their sheep, and Mu Yangling shrewdly stuffed 10 cents into his hand. The landlord smiled and said, "Girl, the governor of our Xinyuan Mansion is kind. You only need to give me some meaning in the city, but you have enough sheep, and they are all on a large scale, I'm afraid." Mu Yangling hurriedly said, "Uncle, these sheep are not all from my family, but from every household in the village. Isn't this the Hu people who were beaten away by General Qi? No one will take this sheep, and this year there is a drought, there was no harvest in the field, and the village had no choice but to let me drive the flock down to try my luck. Well, it should be possible to pay less money for the soldiers guarding the gate. Then she should pay the tax. Isn't she most afraid of the extra fees charged by the soldiers? It would cost her a flock of sheep 4 or 5 taels of silver to drive them into the city, but when the time comes, the gatekeepers will catch too. Will she resist, or will she pretend she didn't see it? Bribing soldiers is more expensive than paying taxes." Mu Yangling became annoyed. How can such a large flock of sheep be driven in? Bowen served his sister a bowl of rice and said, Why do we have to drive all of them in? Sister, we can invite people out of the city just like the white landlords and others. Let us choose by ourselves, and the soldiers guarding the gate will bully us as foreigners. Only people who dare to ask for bribes, if they are locals, they won't have this trouble, and if the rest can't be sold, we'll go to the city and try again. Mu Yangling was overjoyed, rubbed Bowen's hair and said, "Okay, boy, my sister didn't expect this, then we feel like eating and taking a bath, and have a good sleep first, and we will go to the city tomorrow." Mu Yangling left Zhongwu to watch the sheep, and took Zhonglu and Ziyuheng Bowen into the city. Following the flow of people into the city, passing the gate of the city, the streets inside are suddenly revealed to everyone. The streets are twice as wide as Xingzhou Mansion. The sun has just risen, and there are already many people on the streets. Mu Yangling stood for a while, then said, "Let's go to the tea house to have some breakfast first, and inquire about the news." The group sat down in a nice-looking tea house. The tea house had 2 floors, and a shed was built outside, with 4 or 5 tables inside. Most of the people sat on the first floor, but there were fewer people on the second floor. Obviously, these people came not only for breakfast, but also for chatting. This is similar to Xingzhou Prefecture. Mu Yangling found a table and sat down. The smiling Xiao came forward to wipe the table. When he looked up and saw them, he was taken aback. He had never seen them before. Although he was in a tea house, anyone who came to have breakfast would be fine. It's acquaintances, few strangers appear, and it's not drinking tea at noon. What would you like to eat, fellow guests? Xiao Er hesitated to wipe his gaze away from Zhonglu and put it on Mu Yangling. He is a clever young man with a wink. He knew so quickly that she was the boss between them. Mu Yangling glanced at the other tables and said, 10 big meat buns, 4 bowls of mutton soup, and another plate beef. Mu Yangling paused, and asked, "Do you have beef?" "Oh, good luck, girl. Our shopkeeper just grabbed dozens of caddies of beef yesterday, and was about to add a dish to the lunch." "Okay, I want these first, let's go." When everyone heard what Mu Yangling ordered, they all turned their heads to look at them curiously, and turned their heads away after only a few glances. The meat buns at this time were twice as much as they bought in the previous life. Although the skin was a bit thick, they were still delicious. Mu Yangling ate 4 by himself, Bowen and Ziyuheng each ate 1.5, and Zhonglu also ate 3. After cleaning up the beef on the table, the 4 drank the hot mutton soup contentedly. Seeing that Xiao Er was not so busy anymore, Mu Yangling beckoned him over to ask, "Brother Xiao Er, where is the mutton seller in the city?" "Miss, want to buy mutton? Then you have to go to the vegetable market in Dongxi, there are the most, but you may not be able to buy it after noon. Is lamb so tight? Hey, besides the pork that is always available, don't you have to buy the mutton and beef as early as possible? How can this mutton be compared with beef? Cows cannot be slaughtered at will, but our Xingyuan mansion is not far from the border. How can we eat without mutton?" Say you don't understand, seeing that she is younger than him, and others usually lecture him, it's rare that he can teach someone else, so he said excitedly, "Although our Xingyuan mansion is close to the border, but you don't look at it. The market here was closed 4 or 5 years ago. Where else can we buy sheep? Some people raise sheep, but the main thing is farming. Not one of the 10 families may raise sheep. It was also the goat that was chosen first, but this goat is mutton, how can it compare to the prairie sheep?" Seeing Mu Yangling nodding while listening, the little girl became even more excited, and said, "The old habit left by my ancestors is to eat mutton and drink mutton soup in winter to warm up and build a foundation. Buy a few caddies of donkey meat and come back to try it. Everyone wants to buy it, so they will rush to buy it. Usually, the mutton is sold out after noon, so if you want to buy it, go after breakfast. How much is this lamb?" It depends on what kind of mutton you buy. Goats are 50 yuan a catty, and authentic prairie sheep with no smell are 56 yuan a catty. Well, the one-day trip costs so much money, and this trip was worth it? Xiao Er saw that she was thinking, and said, this prairie sheep sells better than goats, but there are some people who like the smell of goats and think they are strong enough. Mu Yangling gave him 2 pennies, and asked with a smile, then I want to eat mutton, where should I go? 2 pennies is not much, but it was a pleasant surprise to Xiao Er who didn't often receive rewards, so he said more excitedly, that's a lot, wait for me to tell you slowly. What are you talking about? I want to hear it too, a sinister voice behind me remembered. Shocked, Xiao Er went straight forward to pick it up, and when he looked up, the shopkeeper was standing behind him and staring at him. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 279. Mu Yangling pulled Xiao Er up, smiled at the shopkeeper, forgive me, shopkeeper, I am the first to come to Fukan, and I don't understand many things, so I asked brother Xiao Er to inquire about it. When the shopkeeper faced Mu Yangling, it was raining, and he said with a smile, you are welcome, I am worried that this kid's nonsense will delay your business. If you want to eat mutton, it is easy. Any restaurant in the city has it? There are a few mutton restaurants in the distance. Mu Yangling drank the mutton soup in the bowl, wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, stood up and cupped his fists and said, thank you for your advice, shopkeeper. I'll pay the bill and leave now. Mu Yangling took out the money to pay for the meal, and dragged Bowen and the others out. Ziyuheng hurriedly drank up all the mutton soup before following, cousin, why are we leaving in such a hurry? We met a smart man. Mu Yangling looked forward and sighed, I wanted to find a few places to sell things like Sanquin County, but just now the shopkeeper guessed who I am from my few words. Here to sell mutton. Others are not stupid. We have nothing to rely on in the Xinyuan mansion, but we have to be careful, otherwise we won't know if we are sold out. Then what do we do now? Let's go to the mutton restaurant and try it. If it doesn't work, let's go to the vegetable market to ask the price. But the itinerary was not very smooth, because they couldn't even see the owner of the mutton restaurant, but the shopkeeper said that they already had a cooperative butcher, and they would not want the mutton brought by Mu Yangling, even if Mu Yangling said theirs is the best prairie sheep, and the shopkeeper is not impressed. This is the case for Mu Yangling's 3 stores in a row. Xinyuan Mansion is different from a county like Sanquin County. These stores obviously trust their partners who have been working together more than Mu Yangling, who came out easily. Mu Yangling thought about it, and felt that since he couldn't cooperate with them, he could directly find someone who cooperated with them, or sell the sheep to the butcher. Although it would cost less money once he got it, it also saved Dongben trouble running west. Mu Yangling looked at Zhonglu and said, it's up to you next. Zhonglu was full of doubts, so Mu Yangling gave him half a coin and said, go and find out who supplies the mutton in these shops. Zhonglu has been in the market since he was a child, and he knows who to ask about these things best. After receiving the money, he went to buy some food, and deliberately ate it not far from some stalls, talking to the owner of the stall from time to time. In a word, Mu Yangling just lowered his head and raised his head. Zhonglu had already squatted down to eat with the stall owner, talking and laughing loudly while eating. Ziyuheng and Bowen's eyes widened and they were stunned. Bowen stammered and asked, well, Brother Lu is so capable, how can he be like that? People are prejudiced. Everyone in Sanquin County knows that the 2 brothers are beggars. They are not very courageous. I am afraid that even beggars will look down on them. Even if they have this ability, they have no use for it. But here at Xinyuan Mansion, his shoes are newly bought, and he wears a wolf fur on the outside, so his hands and feet are in a hurry. He can eat fried chestnuts with sugar for just snacks, and he can even treat strangers to eat without hesitation. The peddler doesn't know his roots, naturally bring some respect. Bowen was thoughtful, That's why Mr. said that people should not be judged by their appearance, and that they should not be looked down upon just because they are frustrated for a while. Who knows if this person has great abilities and promises. Mu Yangling looked at Zhang Lu, who had already left and walked to another street, looked away, looked at his younger brother seriously and said, even if the other party has no great ability and great promise, we can't look down on him. Respecting people is the basic morality. Everyone respects him, Bowen, Ziyuheng, remember. Ziyuheng was still listening in a daze, but when she heard her name, she immediately responded solemnly and in unison with Bowen, we remember it. Mu Yangling nodded, glanced at Zhang Liu's direction, and said, I'm afraid he will take a while, let's go to the bookstore first. Blog, Ziyuheng, I brought you here this time to let you see the world. In this world, apart from the south, there are no women's schools in the north, so she regrets. Ziyuheng, I also want to buy a few more books for you and Ziyulan. You have finished reading 3-character classic and 1000-character classic. You can read all the characters, so you have to read some history books and topography. It's better to read some miscellaneous notes, which record what celebrities and scholars have seen and heard during their travels. Sister, there are poems and prose. I asked my husband. He said that it is better for girls to read some poems and prose. The others are of secondary importance. Bowen is very concerned about this issue because there are 3 older sisters who are studying at home. Mu Yangling paused for a moment, then nodded and said, this one can also be read. Well, poetry and songs can cultivate sentiment. Ziyuheng lowered her head like a defeated rooster. She doesn't like to read and recognize characters. She thinks that she can read enough characters now, but her cousin always says that reading more books can broaden her horizons, although she doesn't know where she has broadened her horizons. On the other hand, my younger sister is holding a book like an idiot and reading it like a fascination, which is obviously just a 3-character classic. But in front of her cousin, Ziyuheng didn't dare to say it. Mu Yangling was very excited. This was what she had planned in advance. If she came to Xinyuan Mansion when she was free, she would come to buy books, because the books here are much more complete than Xingzhou Mansion, and of course they are cheaper. Mu Yangling went in the direction Zhang Lu was walking just now, but found him squatting in front of a restaurant. She was taken aback for a moment, and then smiled happily. This kid is smart, and he began to figure out what she was thinking. Mu Yangling patted the blog post and said, go and tell Zhang Lu that we are going to the bookstore first, and it will take a long time. Let him wait for us here. After finishing his work, he took out a tael of silver from his money bag and gave it to him. Here, since this kid is on the road, half a tael of silver may not be enough. Hey, Bowen took the money and ran over to give it to Zhang Lu, conveying Mu Yangling's words. Zhang Lu felt excited. If he behaved well, would the girl leave him and her eldest brother behind? Full of fighting spirit, Zhang Lu looked at the blog post with piercing eyes and assured him, don't worry, young master, I will definitely do a good job. Bowen was confused, and he didn't know why Zhang Lu suddenly felt as excited as eating a elixir. He nodded, followed his sister's example, tiptoed and patted his shoulder, saying, well, do your best, my sister will treat you badly. After speaking, he ran away. The peddler who was standing with Zhang Lu leaned over and asked, brother, how old is that young master? Zhang Lu nodded. He wanted to say that he was a slave, but he remembered that Mu Yangling said that the Mu family had no slaves, so he said, I am a part-time worker in their family. Young master and miss are going to buy books, let me go around and buy them for them something. This explains why the other party gave him a tael of silver. The peddler immediately looked at him with bright eyes, okay, brother, you are so good, miss and master trust you so much, you can go home and marry a wife after saving money, you haven't married a wife yet. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 280. The bookstore in Sinyuan Mansion is not far from Fuxue, and a row used to sell books and various school supplies. This is the first time Bowen saw so many bookstores lined up side by side, like a mouse falling into a rice warehouse here, looking left and right with bright eyes. I can't decide which store to go to first. Mu Yangling took Bowen directly to find the largest bookstore and go in. The bookstore has 2 floors. His storefront is twice the size of a shop in someone else's house. It is divided into 2 parts. On the left side are 5 rows of bookshelves filled with books. There are even some famous calligraphy and paintings on the wall, and the wall on the right is full of consignment calligraphy and paintings. Mu Yangling looked up and found that the calligraphy and paintings on them are very good, at least she can understand them. In the bookstore, there were quite a few students from prefectural schools reading in it, and their faces flushed red. Seeing that their cousin was focused on the painting on the right wall, they shrank timidly behind Bowen, but Bowen, who had always seemed a little timid, was very calm. He stepped forward and took out a book to read, and even patted his cousin to reassure her. Turning around, Mu Yangling was slightly surprised when she saw this scene. It seems that Zhu Heng still has low self-esteem. Although there is a lot of turmoil in the village, she will become timid when she meets someone with a higher status than her. Bowen, on the other hand, has always been a little weak and timid. I didn't expect to be so calm, and take charge. Mu Yangling was very pleasantly surprised. She stepped forward and patted Zhu Heng, who immediately held her cousin's hand, feeling at ease. Bowen, check for yourself what you need. We have brought enough money, so you choose it first, don't waste it, everything can be saved, except food and education. Bowen responded with a smile. Mu Yangling was about to choose the book he wanted to read. The clerk in the bookstore quickly followed him and asked in a low voice, "Miss, do you want to buy a book? I don't know what kind of book you want to buy. I will help you find it." Mu Yangling and the others don't look like book buyers. Although they are wearing wolf fur coats, they are all working, not like scholars. Mu Yangling didn't notice the buddy's mind. She told him that she wanted to read some history books and topography. With a buddy showing the way, Mu Yangling quickly found the place. There were several young students standing there. When they saw the 2 girls approaching, they all blushed and turned slightly to avoid it. The history books that Mu Yangling read were all in bookstores, and he really didn't have the money to buy them. However, the history before Tang was exactly the same as the previous life, and the difference was after Tang. But she only knows a rough idea of the previous history, not some specific historical events, and the history written by the ancients is not the same as the translated second-hand history they read in later generations, so Mu Yangling made the history books after Qin choose the recognized one and take it. Before the Ming dynasty, the emperor and those in power could rarely interfere with the writing of history books, and there was no Ming dynasty in this world. Calculated by historical time, it did not develop to the Ming dynasty, which is similar to the southern Song dynasty. Therefore, folks can also compile history books. At this time, there are more books. Fortunately, each era has the best one. Mu Yangling only needs to read that book to know the basic history. Seeing that Mu Yangling picked out 4 books at once, the guy clicked his tongue. Mu Yangling handed the book to him, and went to describing topography and travel notes to find 3 books that he was interested in. At first, no one noticed Mu Yangling, but Xiao Er walked back and forth twice, and those who read the book couldn't help but look at her. Seeing that Mu Yangling just picked up the book and read the first few pages before handing it to the waiter, they couldn't help but look at her carefully. I don't think she is someone who can afford a lot of books. Mu Yangling's 5 senses are keen, and she has long noticed that people in the bookstore are looking at her. After a change of mind, she also understood that in this era, although there is movable type printing and paper making is also very advanced, books are still very good. Expensive, because there is no such thing as piracy in this world, all books are genuine. From this, I have to say that the ancient merchants were very conscientious, the books were exquisite and durable, and there were few typographical errors. Because the ancients were very strict about books, modern people buy books just for reading, but they buy books not only to read for themselves, but also to pass on the book. The waste paper is sold, and it is passed on to future generations. After decades or even hundreds of years, the writing of this book is still clear and the paper is not damaged. So this book is very expensive. It is so expensive that except for the children of the rich, even the middle class cannot afford to buy books freely. Dude, do you have any books on agriculture and water conservancy engineering? Mu Yangling felt that she might have to farm the land for a lifetime. She didn't know it in her previous life, but now she needs to learn more. It's not enough to learn from her aunt and the others. Have to look at the book. The clerk looked at Mu Yangling blankly. Here, there are still books for farming. He hadn't been in the bookstore for a long time, and he had only heard people ask him where the Analects of Confucius and other Enlightenment books and history books were. No one really asked. Where is his book on farming? The shopkeeper has been keeping an eye on this place, and immediately came over upon hearing this, and said with a smile, "The little girl is looking for something like Qi Min Yao Shu." Mu Yangling nodded with a smile. It's exactly this kind, and there are books on water conservancy construction. Mu Yangling's previous life was not very good at science, but she was familiar with things like calculations, so she wanted to try to see what she could do. You can't learn some water conservancy knowledge by yourself. If you want to farm, you must have good water conservancy conditions. All this is for better farming. This kind of book is a bit out of the way, so it's on the second floor. I'll take the girl up to find it. The shopkeeper led the way. When everyone saw Mu Yangling coming down, Mu Yangling had 4 more books in his hand. The shopkeeper showed 2 more respects to Mu Yangling. Just now when Mu Yangling was selecting books, he was watching from the sidelines. She chose very carefully. Chapter reading, he watched her choose these 4 out of a dozen books, and these 4 were the best books in agriculture and water conservancy engineering. It can be seen that she is not picking blindly. Mu Yangling chose the ones he needed, and Ziyuheng found 2 brochures below, and excitedly said to Mu Yangling, "Cousin, I want to buy these 2 brochures for my sister." The shopkeeper smiled and said, "Girl, this is the most fashionable look this year." Mu Yangling flipped through it, then buy it back. Although my mother can draw flowers by herself, it's good to see what is fashionable outside. Together with these 2 books, Mu Yangling chose a total of 13 books, and Bo Wen also brought 3 books over, handed them to his sister with a blushing face, and leaned into her ear and said, "I want to buy 1 more. Zhu Zi's commentary, but it is very expensive. A book costs 12 taels of silver." Mu Yangling raised his eyebrows in surprise. Zhu Zi's commentary is so expensive. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 281. Zhuzi annotation is Zhu 11's 4 books Zhangjizhu covering University, Doctrine of the Mean, Analects of Confucius, Mencius, and a masterpiece of commentary on the 5 classics. Later generations respected Zhu 11, so they changed the 4 books' chapters and sentences to Zhu Zi's commentary. A book is expensive, but it is not so expensive, right? Besides, it's just a reference book. Mu Yangling is not very willing for his younger brother to buy this book. With the annotations of this book, it is much easier to read, but students are also less able to use their brains to think, and the things they learn are more superficial. But she doesn't want to wrong her younger brother. Everyone has them. My husband asked a question, and the other students would understand what it meant after taking out the book, but my younger brother had to rack his brains to think about it and verify it. It seemed a little pitiful. The shopkeeper explained, This is an exquisite version, much better than other versions. So there are other versions, it's just a reference book, so you don't need to buy such a good one. The shopkeeper, please forgive me, Miss and young master. Unfortunately, the other editions are sold out. Now there are only 2 exquisite editions. If you wait for other editions, you will have to wait until the end of the new year. You are so late in replenishment, why is the business still so good? Mu Yangling flipped through Zhu Zi's commentary, but still felt that it was unnecessary to buy such an exquisite reference book, so he said, why don't we go to another place? If there are separate volumes, we will buy Mencius and the Analects of Confucius, 2 volumes will do. Bowen asked in a daze, why don't you buy a whole volume? The scholar next to her was also a little dissatisfied. She saw that Mu Yangling had bought a lot of useless books, but she was reluctant to spend money on her younger brother who was studying. Following the gentleman's style of helping each other when the road was injustice, the scholar treated Mu Yangling sternly. He said, girl, reading is the real thing for men. A copy of Zhu Zi's commentary is expensive, but as long as you buy a few miscellaneous books, you can buy it. You know the importance of a copy of Zhu Zi's commentary to scholars. He looked longingly at the exquisite and heavy book in Mu Yangling's hand, and said, how many students save money for several years just to buy a copy of Zhu Zi's commentary. I don't think Zhu Zi's commentary is very important, Mu Yangling snorted coldly. I only know how many Zhu Zi's commentary has nourished and crippled the minds of teachers and students, and it is because of this book that students translate 4 books according to this, and the opinions of the articles are almost the same. What's so good about it? After finishing speaking, he turned his head and scolded Bowen coldly, don't say that we didn't buy this book now. Even if I bought it back, I would easily not allow you to read it. If you let me know that the teacher assigns you homework and you copy the handouts on it, I will beat you. There is Zhuowenjizi at home, you can make sentences and translate by yourself. If you don't understand, you can ask your classmates, ask your husband. This book, you can only use it as a reference at most. If you let me know, you take it as the golden rule. I not only burned this book for you, but you also went to the ancestral hall to kneel for me. Mu Yangling's anger frightened Bowen and Ziyuheng. She always loved them very much, and she was seldom angry. Even when she was angry, she mostly reasoned with them in a soft voice, and she rarely lost such a big anger. Ziyuheng tugged on her cousin's sleeve, and Bowen lowered his head to admit his mistake. Yes. Mu Yangling snorted, stared at Zhu Zi's commentary for a while, and then put it in the pile of books. The scholars in the bookstore all looked over, some glared at Mu Yangling, thinking she had insulted Zhu Zi, and some bowed their heads in thought. And the scholar who preached to Mu Yangling before took 2 steps back after a long silence, and solemnly bowed to Mu Yangling, girl, thank you for awakening the person in the dream. I understand why Sir Let Us Be in class sentence translations are not allowed to read Zhu Zi's commentary. Mu Yangling gave him a strange look, and said in a voice that only they could hear, your husband must regret accepting a student like you. The scholar didn't expect that he would thank the little girl, but the little girl would still humiliate him. Her face turned red for a moment, and just about to get angry, she heard the little girl sigh. The reason why your husband didn't say it clearly is because you can't say it. You want to think of Zhu 11's influence among scholars now, silly boy. The scholar's face turned even redder. This time he was not angry, but ashamed. He felt that he was ashamed of his husband. Because of the little girl's silly child, she was called a silly child by an 11 or 12-year-old child. The shopkeeper also looked at Mu Yangling in surprise, but he didn't say anything. Seeing that they had already made up their minds, he asked, Miss, would you like to see those school supplies? The pen, ink, and paper here are also cheaper than those outside. Some. Shopkeeper, we bought so many things, you should count us as cheaper. Ziyuheng, who hadn't said a word, began to bargain. The shopkeeper was taken aback, seeing that Mu Yangling was also looking at him. He nodded with a smile, "This is no problem. Bowen, go pick some more paper, don't you have enough pen and ink?" Bowen has recovered from the reprimand just now, and ran to choose a lot of paper. As the shopkeeper said, "The paper here is indeed cheaper than that in the county, so buy more." Mu Yangling sat with his chin propped up and watched his younger brother move all the things he liked like a hard-working rat. She couldn't help but touch the silver in the bag. Fortunately she brought all the money with her, otherwise she really didn't dare to buy things with confidence. Everyone was terrified when they saw it, and even the shopkeeper became suspicious. Their parents really feel so relieved to let their children bring so much money to buy books? Judging by their attire, they don't look like they are particularly rich. Bowen brought a box of ink with a smile on his face, and said contentedly, "Sister, I'm done buying." Mu Yangling pushed the things in front of the shopkeeper. "You count the money, but you have to give me a cheaper price." The shopkeeper took out his abacus and started typing, and finally said, "A total of 52 taels of silver." The shopkeeper was silent for a while, and said, "I don't want these 3 coins, just give me 52 taels." Mu Yangling looked at Ziyuheng, but Ziyuheng focused on the pile of papers at the door, took a dozen from it, and said, "Shopkeeper, we bought so much, please send us a few dozen papers. The bookstore is a place of scholarly fragrance, how can it smell of copper?" People who came to buy books never bargained, so it was fine for this person to haggle with him, but he even wanted to talk to him, thinking that he was buying vegetables at the vegetable market. The shopkeeper made a serious face, and said, "Girl, our bookstore has never bargained for the price. The reason why the $3 are missing is because you bought more than 50 taels at once." Ziyuheng held a dozen papers and looked at him with teary eyes. "Uncle, I know, but this time we spent so much money, my grandma will definitely not be happy. If you give us a few dozen papers, my grandma might be upset. Don't blame us." The shopkeeper opened his mouth and asked, "Don't your family know when you go out to buy books?" The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 282. I know, but I definitely didn't know that my cousin would buy so much. We didn't expect that a book would cost 12 taels. This is enough for our family to chew for a year. Ziyuheng looked at him anxiously, and said, "My family also has a younger brother and 2 younger sisters. They also learn to read, so these papers are for them to practice calligraphy. I see that you put these papers at the door, and they are a little yellowed. It seems that they are not very sold. Might as well send me a few dozen." "A few dozen won't work, I'll give you 1 dozen at most." The shopkeeper gritted his teeth and could only whisper. Ziyuheng smiled openly, took another dozen and said, 2 dozen, 2 dozen, we can carry it. No matter how bad the paper is, a dozen of such thick paper can sell for 300 cash, and 2 dozen can sell for 600 cash. The shopkeeper said angrily, "There are so many things, can you children handle them?" "We can hold it, we can hold it, we can hold it with a few more dozen." The shopkeeper hurriedly said, Okay, you can't take any more, girl, you'd better pay the bill quickly." Only then did Mu Yangling take out 52 taels of silver from the bag and gave him the money. The shopkeeper watched their backs disappear, and the anger on his face disappeared immediately. He smiled a little, shook his head and said with a smile, "These children are quite shrewd." The book was wrapped in oiled paper and Mu Yangling held it in his arms. When the 3 of them walked back to the agreed place, Zhonglu was already waiting there. According to his inquiries, the mutton restaurants and restaurants in the western part of the city all buy from 3 butchers. "This is good news, there are few people, so please." Zhonglu said, "The butcher who has done the most business is surnamed Qin, and he can be found in the vegetable market." Mu Yangling looked up at the sky, and decided to have lunch first before inviting people. It was past lunchtime, there were not many people in the vegetable market, and most of the stalls were empty, so Butcher Chin just sat on a chair and slept. Mu Yangling and the others inquired all the way over. As soon as the man with a fierce face, tall and strong, lying on a chair and resting his feet on another chair came into view, the three of them knew that he was Chin Butcher. There was no way. Looks too iconic. The three of them walked up to him, and Mu Yangling looked at the meat on his chopping board, and thought that since he hadn't packed it up and went home, he must still be in business, so it shouldn't be a problem if she woke him up, right? Just as Mu Yangling was about to reach out to call for someone, Chin Tuhu opened his eyes fiercely. Seeing 3.5 children standing in front of him, he grinned and asked, "Are you buying meat?" Mu Yangling looked at Butcher Chin, who was better off smiling than not smiling, silently withdrew his hand, shook his head and said, "Uncle Chin, I have a business to talk to you about." Butcher Chin frowned and looked at them. Well, frowning is worse than smiling, but the three of them managed not to be intimidated, but Ziyuheng and Bowen looked at him curiously. The people next to him laughed and said, "Old Chin, don't scare other people's children, talk to them about business, ah." Mu Yangling was sure that she saw the embarrassment on Chin Tuhu's face, and she was absolutely right, although he was still fierce when he was embarrassed. "What business do you want to talk about?" Seeing that the three people in front of him didn't seem to be intimidated by him, and he had a good impression of them, Chin Tuhu asked like a bell. "The vegetable market is not a place to discuss business." Mu Yangling looked around, and the Butcher Chin understood it at a glance. He left the stall to a person next to him to help take care of it, and took the initiative to find a place. So, the four of them stood in the cold wind and talked about business. Mu Yangling hurriedly took Bowen and Ziyuheng to the foot of the wall to hide from the wind. Seeing a sudden flash across Chin Butcher's face, she smiled and said, "This place is not bad. The air is good, and there is no one there." Chin Butcher's face was even more embarrassing, and he hurriedly explained, "This street is full of vegetable markets, and there are no tea houses to rest at all. It's the quietest place here, and it's tasteless." Mu Yangling nodded, "Uncle Chin, I have a group of prairie sheep, so I want to ask if you want them." Chin Butcher was taken aback, looked Mu Yangling up and down, and asked, "Aren't you from Xingyuan Mansion?" Xingyou Mansion is not far from Xingyuan Mansion, and Xingyou Mansion is the state capital under Xingyuan Mansion, so Mu Yangling has no accent problem. "I'm from Xingyuan Mansion, but I'm from Xingyou Mansion. My sheep came from Hanzhong Mansion." The Hanzhong Mansion was forced by the barbarians to use the fields to raise livestock. He knew about it. At that time, he followed the big guys and scolded the barbarians for being perverted. If the land is not grown, it is used to grow grass and raise sheep. Isn't it just for money? He was shocked, and believed most of what Mu Yangling said, looked her up and down, and asked hesitantly, "The little girl is only 12 years old, why does your adult let you come to discuss this business?" "After the new year is indeed 12, Mu Yangling said with a smile, "My parents didn't come, just me and my younger brother and sister came." Butcher Chin opened his mouth wide. "Xingyuan Mansion is not close to here, at least he has never been there." He stared at her fiercely, not to mention the little girl in front of him. The two children next to him also looked at him calmly, not afraid at all. The boy even yawned and leaned against the wall thinking sleep. So calm, it really seems to be doing something big. But even if Xingyou Mansion is a border gate, the children in it should not be so precocious and capable. They dare to take their younger siblings out to venture out at the age of 12. Butcher Chin thought about it for a while, and felt that he had nothing for others to figure out, so he nodded and said, "Then you wait, I'll close the stall, and I'll go and see the goods with you later." He carried all the meat on Butcher Chin's chopping board to another butcher, patted him on the shoulder and left. Bowen dozed off along the way, and Mu Yangling knew that it was time for the child to take a nap. Because he was weak, his schedule had always been stable, and naps must be guaranteed. Although he was on his way for the past 2 days, as soon as it was time for his nap, he would climb into the carriage, lie down on a thick quilt, build another bed by himself, and sleep with his feet a little lower. Zhang Lu, who came back early with his things on his back, was already looking at the entrance of the village. When he saw Mu Yangling coming back, he hurried over and said, "Girl, a rich family in the village wants to buy sheep from our family. We didn't dare to make the decision. We have to wait for you to come back woolen cloth." Mu Yangling raised her eyebrows in surprise. She didn't expect that there would be a business that came up on her own initiative. She asked with a smile, "How much does he want to buy?" "Everything," Zhang Lu said with faint anger on his face. "Girl, he is very arrogant, which is nothing, but he paid the price as soon as he came, saying that it was all inclusive for 2 or 2, and he also brought a lot people are around the fence." The smile on Mu Yangling's face disappeared, and she didn't avoid the Qin butcher, and asked Zhang Lu, "A rich household in the village?" "Very rich." Zhang Lu immediately shared all his information, which shows their skills. Zhang Lu was able to inquire about these secrets from the villagers after a long time since he came back.